doing well wherever they're at tonight and being safe. This will be recorded and we'll have it on my YouTube channel after this. So in case you do miss anything or if you want to go back and watch it or have any questions, I will send a link to Cheryl who will thereby send it to you. And then we'll have a chance to continue the conversation if you want. So the topic of tonight's presentation is about mastering your interview. And I'm going to have the chat open here on the side, so I'll answer questions while I go. And this is something I've been thinking about for the last couple of months. I had this topic in my head and I went to Cheryl and I'm like, you know what? I really want to discuss it because I think it's, really important to do so because interviewing is your way into any company, but more so interviewing as I've just watched over the last year happen on Albert's List with Corey Hiramoto and our mock interviews is a really intimidating, complex process for a lot of people. And it's without any accident that it is, because it is kind of designed to be complicated. You're going through this minefield of questions. You're trying to figure out what it is that you need to say and what they want to hear, and really align the two of those things. And it really comes down to what I would consider to be a much more simplified model. And so I'm going to go through this model tonight, and we're going to do some practice and we're going to do some discussion, probably primarily through the chat to just see how you did. And so let's start with this presentation here. So a little bit about me, my day job. I actually don't work. I work at Albert's List. That's my side hustle. It's something I've been building since 2013. We're a community of 46,000 members on Facebook, and you can go through the link here that I have, which is the short link to join up with other recruiters, job seekers, hiring managers, career coaches, and more. By day, I work at a tech company. I work at Oracle as a senior content marketing manager and strategist in the HR software space. So I see the conversation happening on both sides, whether it's the fact that we're heading into an interesting time with the Great Resignation, and so companies are starting to invest more in skills for their workforce, or the fact that that a lot of job seekers are looking to jump ship because they know that their employers have not treated them very well over the past year and that something needs to change. And so being in the middle of that conversation is a joy every single day, because it really brings to light whether the conversations are in alignment or whether we're just ships passing in the night. I was also born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, lived in LA for 3 years, went to Santa Clara University, also went to high schools in the South Bay. And so I'm a local, one of those Bay Area folks that left and came back, which is a very big rarity these days. And so the agenda today I want to talk about is I want to talk about the problem. I want to just cover off on the challenge of interviewing and what it means for everybody. It's tough, especially when you're looking for a job and you don't have a job, and you're nervous and you're walking to these interviews wondering what people are going to ask you. Then we're going to talk about the framework, which is looking at an interview from a point of being able to navigate risk and marketing yourself as the solution. And then a tip for entry-level employees, and then a little bit about how to prepare for yourself for the interview. And then we'll take questions and answers if we don't have them in the midst of this presentation. So I want to talk about the problem first. So the problem is that a lot of us interview for jobs with our own needs in mind and never with the idea of what others want. Others of us are overwhelmed by the process and wonder how to play this game, right? It kind of amounts to something where I've felt before, where it's like everybody else is playing this game by their own rules, and I'm trying to enter this game, and the rules keep changing, and I have no idea how to accommodate myself to this game so that it works. If this is you, put your hands up, because I really want to see how many of you are going through it tonight. In other ways, a lot of us are also overwhelmed by this game, because sometimes we go into a job knowing that we have bills to pay and that we need to make ends meet, but even more so, we are not aware of what's at stake, and we're trying to figure out that as it goes, right? The business is hiring us for a reason, and we don't know why they're hiring. and we need to know why, but we're going in because we need to pay those bills. And understanding what's at stake in your work is a completely different presentation that I've given here before as well. I do have a copy of that presentation if you ever want to take a look at it. And so the solution that I came to thinking of as I thought about and reflected on interviewing over the past year and a half and over the past couple of months really is to find a way to simplify the conversation, right? Because the best interviews and the best job interviews you ever have are those where you're just having a conversation with the other person on the other side of the table. I know that for a lot of you, you marked that you were in the mid-level of your job of your career. And so those are actually those are actually the types of the level of where you're at, where your ability to master that interview is actually just as great as a conversation. It comes down to, are you interested in having this job? And let's talk about the points and places where we align. If you're more in the entry level, it's being able to justify your existence and why you're good at what you do. And if you're in the senior level, it's being able to communicate how you can lead the organization to get to the next steps of where you want, where they want things to be. But ultimately, the ability for you to simplify that conversation and create a conversation that is in alignment to both you and the other person really matters. So let's sort of take a look, right? The first thing I want to talk about tonight is navigating risk. And when I think about navigating risk, I think about some of these questions, right? Number one, would you marry someone without dating them? Most of us wouldn't. Most of us, and I hope all of us would want to go on a few dates, suss this person out, ask the questions that we need to ask, discover for a while, what their positives and negatives are, and whether we can tolerate them. Would you buy a house without touring it? I know for a lot of us, we definitely would want to buy a house and tour it first, save for a couple of Bay Area exceptions where you buy a house without seeing it at all. But you would want to buy a house and see it first because you want to inspect it. You want to see what's good about the house, what's bad about the house, and whether you really would want to live in this house and tolerate paying the mortgage. Would you judge a book without reading it? We're at a library. I think Cheryl would hope that all of you would borrow the books and not look at just the cover to know what's on the inside. Same with getting to know somebody. Would you want to know somebody based on just what they wore in front of you? Sometimes that's a yes, most of the times it's a no, because a lot of people are more than they seem to be. Or would you show up to an airline ticket counter without buying a ticket? I mean, I know it's fun to go ahead and buy a ticket and and be that individual who jet sets and goes into a destination without thinking of it, but most of us pack for a destination in mind. And so with that question in mind, I ask, would you hire someone as a professional without interviewing them, right? Unless you're somebody who comes well recommended, you're somebody who comes with a lot of really great cachet, you generally want to talk to someone first to get an understanding of, are they a good fit? Does this fit their motivations? Does it fit what the company needs, and so forth? And so if you answered no, this is exactly how employers think. They don't hire to just hire. They're looking to fill a role because they have something at stake. If you're a marketer, they're looking to expand the awareness of a particular product. If you're a software engineer, they're looking to build a solution and build it with somebody who can competently create it and take that company to the next level. If you're an accountant, they want somebody who can count the money and count it right and do it ethically. And so with knowing that companies want to hire because they want to make more money or they want to make something more efficient, you have to come into the interview knowing that by hiring you, they are taking on the risk that is your candidacy. And even more so to that, being able to hire is also a very expensive proposition. The average role takes about 40 some days to fill. And depending on who the recruiter is paying for it or being paid to fill this role, can cost anywhere between $10,000 to up to $40,000 or more. The more expensive the role, the more senior the role, the more that price goes up. And replacing failed hires is expensive. As somebody who's been laid off and fired several times myself, I understand this because the jobs that I was working in made $60,000 to $80,000 a year, and competency was definitely very well needed. And if you use 6 months on trying to train somebody or help them understand what's at stake or what to do, then it becomes a very questionable situation. And so if you answered yes to this question, the job just either might be a scam or you just have really, really great skills at being able to trust other people. So the big question as we come into this is, how do you reduce the risk you bring to a job interview or a company, right? And the premise of this presentation today is to look at the questions that you're going to get as an interviewer and being able to, as an interviewee, and being able to navigate those questions and navigate those questions competently. Because as I'm going to share with you throughout this presentation, your questions are going to come down to one, two, and maybe come down to two, maybe three different categories. Number one, it's how you answer the questions that mitigate your risk. And number two, it's how you answer the questions that help sell you as the best solution out there. And number three, if you are one of the entry-level employees in the crowd, it's how do you answer that question? Know that you might actually burn down the house, crash the car, etc., all the disasters that you may think of as a candidate, and be able to still allow the business to keep moving forward and grow from those mistakes so that you can mitigate as much risk, even though risk is still always going to be there, and allow the business to continue to operate. And so navigating the risk equation comes down to these 7 things that I've been thinking about. Number one, the biggest part about interviewing is mitigating your risk, right? So a lot of you might be sitting in the crowd and saying today, I'm not a risky person. I just want a job. I want to get into my next job and I'm going to show up every day. I'm going to do really great work and they can depend on me and I'll hopefully get paid every 2 weeks and I'll be able to live my life and they'll be able to live theirs. Unfortunately, that's not the case because for a lot of recruiters, they'll sometimes hire someone, the paperwork will be signed, and then on the first day, the new hire chooses not to show up. As much as we also have recruiters who ghost candidates, there are candidates and those new hires who ghost recruiters as well. And that's becoming a challenge as more people quit jobs to go and get better jobs that they want. Number two, it's not you, it's the business, right? So the business is a risk. Everything that the business does is a risk, whether it's pivoting to a new product, whether it's finding a new way to serve their customers, or just being able to exist in a really competitive market. They want to know that the people they hire offer that opportunity to be able to take that business to the next level. And if it's you, then they want to be able to mitigate that risk and know that you as the best candidate is going to help take them there. Number three, it's being able to learn how to identify those risk mitigation questions. If a company is asking you, for example, what is your greatest strength and greatest weakness, they're not just looking for an answer, but rather they're looking for you to mitigate your risk and understand how you can take that weakness and turn it into a strength. If they're asking you to tell them about a time that you failed, it's not necessarily about you telling them about a time you failed, but also you telling about a time that you failed and then were able to learn from that failure. And your ability to tell that story about how you learned from that failure, as opposed to just learning from that failure, is going to tell them how you're going to handle failure or adversity when you get it at your next employment opportunity. And believe me, if you think that you're going to smoothly sail into your next employment opportunity, there are challenges at every single stop you'll make. That's why they create these job requisitions after all, because they have problems to solve. And as the problem solver, you're going to run into those barriers and they want to know how you're going to solve those barriers. And that leads me to number three, which is identify the stories that mitigate your risk, right? So you're going to be somebody who not only tells them what a time you failed, but you're going to tell a story about how you overcame that failure because that failure had a certain impact on you and the company. And so if you're able to tell that story, you're able to mitigate risk because the hope is that anything you did in the past that was successful can translate into the future. That also translates into living a mindset of self-awareness. As a professional, you go into each and every one of your jobs not only knowing that you're going to take on that role and take on that challenge, but that things may happen that may not be in your favor, whether it's getting into a conflict with a colleague, whether it's launching a product or a project late, or just not being able to complete the work that you were assigned and ultimately being let go. And so, what did you learn from those lessons, right? Silicon Valley has a sort of a love affair with failure, especially if you're here in the Bay Area. This is where that conversation is relevant. We have a lot of people who have started startups, and those startups haven't worked out. We have people who have gone and worked in the corporate space, and those jobs haven't worked out either. But there's always something to learn from those lessons. I did a webinar with Albert's List yesterday. I know some of you were on that webinar, where the person I spoke with on who is leading this webinar said that failure did not exist, but lessons did. And so when you think about it like that, you live in that mindset of self-awareness and you understand what lessons you've collected along the way in your journey of life, and you can apply that into your next role. Sometimes we may not succeed, but those situations lead us to our next place where we can apply what we've learned and hopefully take ourselves to the next level. Number 6 is the question of discovering what they are really truly asking for. If somebody is asking you to tell them your biggest strength or biggest weakness, are they really asking you what your biggest strength or biggest weakness? What does it really mean at the end of the day? They want to know what you're passionate about. They want to know what you're good at. If somebody's asking you to tell them about the project that you're the most proud of, yes, they definitely want to hear what the project that you're the most proud of is, but they also want to hear why, because they want to gauge what your passions are. They want to be able to plug you into the projects that matter within the company and be able to see you be at your best, because when we like doing something, we do it really, really well. That's a pattern that at least I've discovered within myself and with a lot of other people. So being able to understand what the true question behind the question is and dig through that subtlety is a big thing that matters. And then finally, something that I also find that's really, really key is reducing the avenues of concern. The avenues of concern is something that I describe as things that come up during the interview process that you're going to ultimately walk yourself into because you said something in the wrong way. So for example, an avenue of concern to a question might be, tell me about the reason why you left your previous role. Right? That's going to be a question that may spark an avenue of concern, because you're going to answer the question in the method of saying, well, I didn't really like my previous company. My boss was really, really bad to me. They made me stay after 5 o'clock every single day, and they were a micromanager. And so I don't want that job anymore because I want to be independent in my role. That brings up numerous avenues of concern, because it says you left your last job because you wanted to give up on something, number one. Number two, you left your last job because you couldn't get along with your boss, which brings into question around whether you can get along with other people. Number three, depending on the company, it brings about an avenue of concern because it may suggest that you don't want to work the extra hours or sacrifice this hours in order for you to make the company look good, your boss look good, and your colleagues look good. And so with a lot of these questions, and even another question, for example, could be, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Some of us may go out and say, well, I see myself in your role in 5 years. And because I see myself in your role, it's I want to be a director and I want to lead this company to greatness. Well, that creates an avenue of concern, because ultimately the person interviewing you might think, oh, this person's coming after my job. This person's risky because they're going to take away what's rightfully mine before I leave, and I might not have a chance to do what I want to do here. Instead, you may say something like, well, I want to be here still, and I want to increase my roles and responsibilities. It's a neutral answer to a potentially combative question, And it reduces your avenues of concern because it focuses on what your goals are and how it may align with the company, especially if the company wants to grow. And so just to keep in mind with that, reducing your avenues of concern is going to reduce your chances of being a risk. So what kind of questions examine risk? I'm going to give you 4 questions here. These are 4 commonly asked questions that you're going to get within an interview. Some of you may have gotten these in the past before. Some of you may be yet to get these questions. There are millions of questions that can be asked in any interview. And I wanted to just go through some of these just to explain how I'm reasoning through the logic of what it means to be a risk and how to mitigate that risk. So number 1, a lot of us may be asked, especially for those of us who have been out of work during the COVID-19 pandemic, why do you have a gap on your resume? And so what are they really asking for when it comes to this question, and what does the risk underlie? Number 1, the risk that underlies with this question is you spent a lot of time or some amount of time outside of the workforce. And how have you spent that time during that outside time during the workforce to help make you a compelling and attractive candidate to this organization? What have you learned during this gap? How have you applied yourself? And how can you take what you've applied yourself and turn yourself into an attractive and interesting candidate that can help you hit the ground running as a worker here on day 1? And so in terms of ways to think about of yourself as a least risky candidate, you have to connect what you've done during your off time with what the company wants and align it together. And so you may say something like, well, I was laid off, unfortunately, during the COVID-19 pandemic. And during the time that I was away, I picked up new skills in digital marketing, in software engineering, and I'm ready to start and I'm able to contribute in these 3 ways. And so that mitigates your risk because it says, okay, number 1, I've spent my time doing something productive. And number 2, with that productive time, I can take your company to the next level by doing these any number of things. The second question I want to talk about is a question that you're going to hear a lot, especially if you're experienced, and that's tell me about a time when you failed. And so many of us might approach this question by actually just going into what we did that failed. I was fired from my previous job. We didn't deliver a product on time. I had too many mistakes in my writing. And that's a time that I failed and I'm not proud of it, right? And you may keep this question really simple or this answer really simple because you don't want to say anything. But in reality, what your employer and what your interviewer wants to hear is what did you learn from failure? And will you make that mistake again? See, one of the things that you'll hear often in a job interview is something very similar to when you think about trading stocks, right? A stock trading advisor might say, past performance is not an indicative indication of future success. Unfortunately, with an interview process, past performance is everything when it comes to future success because they're hoping that you can replicate each and every single one of the things that you've succeeded in the past and avoid any future failure so that you do not become somebody that they may have to let go or become a sunk cost on. So when it comes to telling about a time that you failed, they want to make sure that you're not going to make this mistake again and that you've learned so much from this failure that you're able to move forward with it and that hopefully your failure is not as bad as any other failures that other candidates have mentioned during the interview process. So your ability to explain your story of going through failure is going to tell your interviewers a lot. Another one is tell me about a conflict you had with a colleague. We live in a world now where we do a lot of our conversations over email, Zoom, Slack, what have you. And during in-person times, it was, conference call meetings and things of that sort. And so conflict, unfortunately, with your colleagues are inevitable because there are things you disagree with. There are things you won't do well at. There are things that you may disagree with strategy, direction of the company. And what a company is truly asking for in these questions is how do you handle conflict? Have you learned from your past conflict? And what do you value as an employee? If you're going to a smaller startup, for example, answering this question is going to be extremely key because one single person who decides to be in conflict with 3 or 4 other people is going to sink the whole entire ship. Whereas if you go to a larger team, a team of maybe 50 or 60, this question is also going to be important because you're going to be a cog in a machine, and your ability to solve those problems is going to be able to is going to be able to really showcase what kind of a team member you are. Miriam, you have a question. You say, how do you explain a gap of 5 years due to starting a family or raising kids? You haven't had a chance to do much outside of the home during those years. Well, so that's a good one, because there are a lot of companies that now understand that a lot of us have left the workforce for the past couple of years to start a family and do such things. And so, as a member who leads your family, you definitely have leadership skills. And number two, you also have maybe paid attention to the industry for a little bit. But number three, you've also been able to apply some of the skills that maybe you've learned at work into running your family. And so, number one, I want to say that if you go to a company and they look down on you having children and starting that family, that would probably be a red flag and a risk on your end as you look through what you want to ask them. If they look down on you and say, "Hey, you went and you had children and you raised them for the past 5 years, and we don't want you here," then that's, on balance, before you even make it into the second or third interview process, not going to be a fit. On the other hand, if you do make it in the interview and they ask, "Oh, you've been a parent for the past 5 years," you can talk about the transferable skills. I was able to raise my children and coordinate times and be able to coordinate play dates. And so I'm organized. I had to stay organized. I had to be able to plan meals. I had to be able to understand how to raise my children. That's your ability to research. And so there's a lots of there's a lot of transferable ideas and transferable concepts that you can use to get to that next stage of your job interview. Anonymous attendee, you're asking for book recommendations. If you can specify, I'd be happy to hop into that question a little bit further. The fourth question I want to talk about within this presentation is, tell me a company that does X things well, right? And so you're going to have companies that want to come to you, and during the interview process, they want to know if you do research. They want to know if you have been able to whether you've been able to look into the industry and adopt best practices across the type of work that you do. Um, and so they want to know whether you have a perspective. They want to know how you'll lend that perspective to the company, and whether that perspective is aligned with the company in question. And so this question is a risk mitigation question, because they want to know that not only can you do your work well, but do you bring insights and do you have an opinion? Companies, more than ever these days, they do want leaders and they don't want followers as much. They want people to be able to come in, offer a strong opinion, and be able to take that opinion to the market and be able to help the company succeed in that market. And so these are just four basic questions to go through. And so as you think about this, it's important to wonder how you navigate through these challenges. So what's the first way of navigating? The first way of navigating is knowing how you tell a story. And so when you tell a story, I prefer the STAR method. The STAR method is something that you use off a question like, tell me about a time that you failed, or tell me about a time that you had a conflict with a colleague. And it's often these types of questions where you have the opportunity to really sell yourself as the person who is the best candidate, because you mitigate any risk that they may have. And so what is the STAR method? The STAR method is four things. It's the situation of what happened. So one time I was entrusted to do a project where I needed to launch a product in 3 or 4 weeks. Task, what did I do? Well, I was entrusted to launch that product, create white papers, create data sheets, create marketing documents, and hold a sales enablement session. Action, what did I do as a result of that, having that task? I chose not to do anything, and I delayed what I needed to do because I was awaiting communication from a remote team to give me the assets that I needed. And those things were slow coming because the product was still in development and I wasn't able to align those times correctly. What happened as a result of the action? Well, I failed to launch the product on time. However, from that, I learned that I needed to have more stringent and coherent one-on-ones with my team on a regular basis to know where things stood and to start on projects early so that I would be able to fill in the blanks as times come. And for the future, I have it within my calendar, I have it within my project management tools to get things done at least 2 weeks in advance so that things don't fall under the rails. And so that's a way to tell the story because I told you why it might have been a risk with my failure, but I covered up that risk by saying this is what I've learned from that with a story, and this is what I plan to do next and how I've been doing it next and why you won't see that mistake happen here. How else do you navigate? You focus on value. So if you're somebody who hasn't worked for a while, if you're somebody who has a gap in their resume, or you're an entry level individual, you might not be able to actually show that you have that risk. And your risk in total is the fact that you don't have that experience, especially if you haven't been in an office yet. And so you have to focus on the value that you're going to add to the organization because organizations are always looking for people who have that value and who can come in and make that change. And so what did you do in the past that can add value to a future employer? What are some projects that you've engaged in? Right? Silicon Valley is the region of side hustles. We've all created a couple of social media profiles. We're all on Twitter. Maybe we write a blog. Maybe we created an Instagram page that's gotten us hundreds and hundreds of followers. Where are some places you volunteered? Maybe you did a homeless kitchen and you were able to coordinate lines and how people came through the lines to be able to get their food. Maybe you volunteered in an office situation where you helped organize an Excel spreadsheet. And how does that organization help a company get to be able to organize their thoughts and ideas so that they can create what they need? And what transferable skills did you learn along the way? I have transferable skills underlined because that is the main reason and the main thing that a lot of employers are looking for when it comes to being able to understand what it is that you're capable of doing and how you can translate those capabilities from your past into your future. And so it doesn't matter whether you worked at a company that uses all Apple devices and you're going to go to a company that uses Android devices. It's fantastic that you did one thing in one place, but you can always apply what you did in that one place into the next place and then be able to show how you can do it and mitigate your risk as a candidate. How else do you navigate? You have to be self-aware. I mentioned self-awareness a little bit earlier, and employers want you to know who you are. You have to be strategically honest. You can be definitely honest about something that happened, say a reason of why you let go, but you have to stick to what the company wants you to know. Remember, you can always say that you were fired from a previous job, but you have to be able to say what you learned from that previous job. Otherwise, it just looks like you took that lesson into your following conversation and maybe you didn't learn a single thing and it'll happen again. And they know that they can't afford to let that happen again. So that comes down to simultaneously mitigating your risk and sell the value you bring to the company. I made that example with my being able to launch a project or product late and then knowing how I've changed that for the future. And so being self-aware of your gaps, being self-aware of why you failed in the past is huge because not a lot of people are. And finally, job descriptions are wish lists, right? We look at a job description these days, we go into an interview and we see that there's like 15 things that they want. And in reality, maybe they need 10 of those things and 5 of those things are nice to haves. And being able to speak to as much as you can on that job description is going to also help you and be self-aware of what you want to do next. All right, so Aiko has a question. Hi, Aiko. It's good to see you. She's a part of Albert's list, and she supports at many of the events that we have. So it's great to see her question here. She asks, "What is the most effective approach to communicate a timeline for us to start working? I have been a guest at my parents' house, and I've decided to create a constraint to move out of the house in 2 months. Curious as to what to say." And so. Well, generally speaking, it's 2 weeks to start your next job, and then to be able to go from there. I think that it's not necessarily as much as a risk mitigation question, as much as an operative question of when you can start working. If the job requires you to relocate, then there will be an adequate timeline created upon when you and the employer can decide that moving over will be a best case scenario. In most cases, that'll also be 2 weeks. The only time where you, I think, become a risk is where you might say, they might request that you move in 3 weeks, but you can't move for another month and a half. And then you have to come to an agreement on how that'll exactly work and hope that business situations don't change in the next month. I hope that answers your question. All right, so I want us to practice a little bit with a couple of these questions that I have here, and we're gonna go and do this for about, I would say, 5 minutes. So if you have a piece of paper or a word processing document, please look at these 2 questions that I have. Number 1 is, what are your greatest strengths and weaknesses? And tell me about a time when you failed. Right, these are some questions that I've mentioned already that come up quite commonly in the interview process. And I want you to be able to write these down. And I'd love for you to actually place some of these answers that you have within the chat. And we're going to brainstorm these a little bit. In the meantime, I'm happy to answer a couple of questions from the Q&A as needed. And so I'm going to let you all go and do that for a couple moments. Aiko says, I want to communicate I am a great candidate to do what it takes. Thanks for answering that question. Yeah, that's something that I think a lot of hiring managers like.
And Albert, I just opened up the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, because normally I keep it closed so that all questions go into Q&A. But
Okay. Yeah. I have 2 of these practice sections, and I just want folks to get involved, and maybe as they write their questions here for the answers for the next 3 minutes, I'd love to hear how you answer these questions in your interview processes.
Oh, mine. Oh,
yes.
Yeah. Actually, that is my number 1 question. I always put on interview questions. Anytime somebody interviews with me, I always put, tell me about a time when you failed.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that time was when I was branch manager at Northside, and I was hosting a Mother's Day Tea Under the Sea program. And it was it's supposed to be a fun day with, moms celebrating with their daughters and, doing crafts that were very sea-like. I remember I was cutting Jello, stars all over the place. And anyways, I didn't know that this program was going to be so successful that we had over like 200 people who were in this program. I had only prepped for 75 to 100 people. So you can imagine that I had to spread all the supplies out, and you can imagine that I had some angry moms. One mom in particular, hopefully you're not in the audience, and I'm sorry if you are, was so mad at me. She had showed up around 30 minutes later than the program start time. And I had told her, I'm really sorry I can't let you in because, we're overbooked. And, and so she was so upset. She told me that I ruined her Mother's Day. And that auto escalated to my the city librarian, who is the library director. And the library director got a not so great email. And long and short of it is I got talked to. I think if I were to redo that situation, obviously I would have prepped more supplies. And obviously I would have made sure to remind people that, we do have a limited supply of items, and also communicate that we're not going to let you in if you are past 15 minutes late for the program. I think you remember this situation. Yeah, this is always the program that and my staff just laughs at me because they always remember that is the one thing, one time when I failed. And I've been a lot of times I failed, but that was the one memorable one. And yeah, my director was not happy to hear from a phone call from the mom. So that was a little
And so I think that's a good answer. I would say that if I was a really real stickler, my avenue of concern would be to look at your answer where you said, I would set out more items next time. right? And that's good that you would do that next time. But my avenue of concern would be, okay, so if you're going to set out more items next time, but 400 people show up, how would you navigate that? Do you have a way to predict how many people will show up? Will you have RSVPs closing at some point to mitigate the risk of having to not have enough time between RSVP close and being able to get the products that you need? And so to really button that up, I think it would not only be like, okay, I would do this next time, and then here are some of the specific actions that I would take to ensure that there are enough for sure, so that no parent comes back to me angry.
Yeah, and I don't ruin their Mother's Day. Which currently, it was the worst Mother's Day of her life, as she told my director.
Oh my goodness. Oh
Yeah,
my
it
goodness.
was a long, lengthy phone call with the husband, and the husband communicated everything to my director. So
Oh my goodness.
I
Oh
got
my
a
goodness.
long talking to about that program.
Yeah. All right. So I'll take this question from the anonymous attendee. In the meantime, for everyone who practiced these answers, please reflect within the chat how this practice went. I'd love to hear. Miriam, I would say my strength is to be adaptable. You can learn fast and you'll be able to provide a solution. Yeah, that's a good answer. And then be able to go into an example of how it is your greatest strength. And then sometimes people will ask you for your greatest weakness on the flip side too. And so being able to answer that as well as you go through the process is going to be really helpful. And I know, Miriam, you were on a mock interview earlier this week with Albert's List, and you were able to answer some of your questions very well, right? And so you say your weakness is being frustrated. And so how do you turn being frustrated into a positive? Because being frustrated is a negative feeling and can bring risk, because let's say you get frustrated with a customer. If you get frustrated with a customer at the company that you work at and you end up blowing up on the customer, then what happens in that situation? So I want to know what your context of that frustration would be. You might say something, my greatest strength is that I'm adaptable and I'm able to adjust to any type of situation. And my greatest weakness is getting frustrated. And I use that frustration as a strength of mine to be able to help my customers get exactly what they need in our customer success process. And so that's the way to put it, to make sure that you're not as big of a risk as an employer might think that you are. Anonymous attendee says, I have a stutter, especially when I'm nervous. Should I disclose so the recruiter and interviewers will know, or should I not disclose and do the best that I can? Yeah, this is a tough one. So I think it, number one, depends on the company, and it also depends on the place that you go and work at. It's definitely something that you can disclose to the recruiter if you feel like you can trust the recruiter enough to tell them. As companies are kind of obliged to do, they have to be able to, um, under the American with Disabilities Act, be able to accommodate what your needs are. And so if the stutter is especially serious, I would definitely bring it up as a point of communication so that they know that they can accommodate you best and be able to know that you'll answer your interview questions and show off how you're competent in the role that you do in the best way that you can possible. So I would absolutely do it. All right. And then Jania says, I'm an organizer who can streamline the chaos. I like that a lot. All right. So, and then Patrice, I'm a team leader. I'm a team lead and sometimes get pulled into answering everyone's questions in chat and solving all the problems, which keeps me from doing my work. I'm learning to let the team try to figure things out on their own first, and if they are blocked, specifically ask me for help. Yeah. So, so that's good, because you didn't necessarily mention a weakness in there as much as you mentioned how you delegate your processes and your work. And so that's also a risk mitigation point, because somebody might say, we have a big team here with a lot of people who who will be reporting up to you. What is your weakness when it comes to delegation? And you're going to say, my weakness is that I get pulled into a lot of conversations and I sometimes don't know how to respond. But one thing I have learned in my previous company is that I want to help people figure out these answers for themselves so that they don't struggle as hard, and that I'm able to really move the business and the operations forward. So good answer. So I wanted to reflect a little bit on the review of the practice that we just did. I want to ask you, and you don't have to necessarily answer live, although I'd love to see it, is what did you notice about your answer? Did you mitigate any potential risks that you may bring by answering the question in the way that you did? And did you open any avenues of concern? Were you answering in a way that might ask for additional questions? So for example, Cheryl mentioned her Mother's Day fiasco that she had happen at Northside Library. And she had mentioned that she learned for the next time that she would not, that she would better plan and have more items out so that people could get what they need. The avenues of concern that I mentioned that I'd opened up was, well, what happens if 400 people show up next time and you plan for 200? What are the steps that you'll take to make sure that you'll only have 200 period going forward, and maybe the next time you'll have excess? And so this is the case with a lot of the questions that you'll end up answering, is that you don't want to create additional questions. You want to be firm with your answers, and you want to be able to show that you are the candidate in mind that they have, and that the problems that they have will stop at the source, which is you, and there will be no additional problems moving forward. Let me answer a couple more questions here. Dave says, how recent of an experience does the relevant story need to be? I'm 31 and I remember something significant that happened when I was 18 working for my first job. Or should I bring something more recent within my past job? So I would prefer that when it comes to an interview, if you're 31 and you had something that happened 13 years ago, if it's significant enough to the point where you're bringing it up as a story, then absolutely do it. However, I think that a lot of employers would want something more recent, especially with the change in technology, the change in the way that we communicate, and the change that we and the way that we work these days. And so, if there's something in the last year and a half, you definitely want to focus on, how you've handled that challenge or that conflict in remote work and so forth. All right. And Aiko, that's a good answer that you gave there. Thank you for providing. So how to mitigate risk? Let's sort of cover off on this final piece here. Number one is that practice makes perfect, and that you should know your answers and write them down. One of the things that I recommend for everyone is that you have a Word doc or a Google Doc open where you put in every single question you've received along the way when it comes to a job interview, and you learn to answer those questions far in advance, and you practice those questions far in advance so that you're able to have those questions almost in your back pocket and be able to answer them as readily as you possibly can without being nervous. And having those questions in advance gives you the advantage, because then you're not thinking as hard as you could be thinking during the process of an interview. And so that's number two, is to anticipate what interviewers will ask in your industry. I work in marketing, so I'm going to get a specific set of questions. You work in your industry, and there's a specific set of questions you're going to get, and those questions are going to be around whatever types of risk that might come to within the organization. Number three is to know what's at stake. Now, I've done a presentation in the past, but what you basically need to know is to know what's at stake for everyone that you're going to be working with and working for within the organization. And so what's at stake? There's a lot of things at stake between what's at stake for you, the company, your coworkers, your direct boss, the industry that you work for, the company at large, and then your customers. And then knowing what's at stake for all of those as you relate back to the work that you do is going to help you communicate your value and mitigate your risk a lot better, because you'll be able to know why the company is hiring for that specific role. You'll have to understand what's really being asked. So as much as we all hope that we go into an interview hoping that there's no subtlety or no ambiguity at all, you really want to know what's being asked. And okay, you have a question. Is there a specific question that I can probably address around ambiguity that maybe I could use an example? Feel free to type that in and I'll go ahead and answer that. And then finally, it's to avoid those avenues of concern. I know a lot of us can get nervous during interviews and we start saying something, and then before we know it, we're telling a story and we're not really quite sure where the story goes. And then this story leads into avenues of concern because it opens up additional things that hiring managers and recruiters uh, want to peer in on. Make sure that you reduce as much of that ambiguity as much as possible and be able to just get straight to the answer and be strategic with your answer as well. Let's see. Anonymous attendee asks, is it possible to get a job in the same industry after 12 years of a gap, or do I need to find something different? You can get a job absolutely in the same industry after a 12 years of gap. You just need to be able to communicate what you've learned in the time that you've been gone and how you can address and apply what you've learned during that gap into that job that you are in now. And so it's back to the transferable skills concept. Kay, in regards to the question on ambiguity, I would say that if you're able to clarify what that question is and what they might be looking for in their answer, or if they're just keeping it ambiguous to keep it ambiguous, then you're then what they really want to know is, in being asked, is how you might be able to handle ambiguity in general. And so if your process of handling ambiguity and mitigating risk is asking questions, creating a plan, being able to execute to that plan, and then adjust as that plan changes, that's also what I would consider to be a good enough answer in that case. Because if they kept it vague, then you have to also change how you approach something and see how you approach that ambiguity as well. So hopefully that answer helps. What do you see as some of the challenges with this position? Yeah, so that's a question that you can ask for an employer if they ask you if you have questions for them. All right, so the next piece I want to talk about is marketing yourself as the solution. So not only are you a person who's going to be mitigating your risk and reducing the amount of risk that you bring into the organization, they also want to know why you're the person that they're going to extend an offer to at the very end of this interview process. And so when it comes to thinking about marketing yourself as a solution, right, would you date somebody who had no confidence? Obviously, you want to know somebody who has value within themselves. Do you want to be able to buy a product that was marketed poorly? I wouldn't buy a product that, was maybe being trashed, in an ad or something like that. I want to see something that shows that it has value. Would you pay for food that was presented poorly? I would say in most cases, I wouldn't. In some cases, if there was a hole in the wall restaurant, that would be an exception that I would make. Would you buy a ticket to fly on a poorly rated airline? Probably not, because you'd want to be as prepared as possible. And so those are all things that come into knowing, would you hire somebody who marketed themselves poorly? You also probably wouldn't, unless they were somebody that you knew was speaking in a way that that you knew that they had the potential and they knew that they had it in them, and maybe they just didn't have it in the interview. But if you answered no, companies want to be able to hire people who can hit the ground running. They want to be able to know, and unfortunately, this is one of those post Great Recession kind of situations where a lot of companies don't want to really pay for training as much as they used to. And so they want you to be able to hit the ground running. They want you to be able to succeed starting from day one, maybe even week one, if that's the case. And they hope that your past success translates to future accomplishments. I mentioned that in the previous section of slides. And, I was saying that for a lot of companies, while in the stock market, your past success does not necessarily translate into future success. Your past success in a workplace definitely must translate into whatever you're doing at your next company, because they want you to be able to replicate it. And the less cost it takes to train somebody, the faster the ROI. Unfortunately, we look at ourselves as human capital. And as human capital, we are assets to the company. And they want us to appreciate as quickly as possible. And in the interview process, they're going to ask you questions that showcase whether you can appreciate at that level. So anonymous attendee, I think you had asked a follow-up to the question of um, what do you see as some of the challenges with this position? So that can be a risk mitigation question as well, because they want you to be able to come in and explain to them what you see as the challenge and how you plan to solve those challenges, right? And so this is actually a question in not as much as the risk mitigation, I spoke poorly here, but a question where you position yourself as the solution. Because if you're able to see why a particular question is is looking towards a challenge, and you're going to be hired there to see that challenge, and you're self-aware to see why that position might be a challenge, then you're going to paint yourself as the best solution possible, because you understand not only what the problems are, but how to get to the end of it and to do it efficiently and the best. And so that's an opportunity for you to mention your competency, how you understand the roles, and how you understand your vision for how you plan to grow within that role and be somebody that they end up promoting. Poonam asks, can you please share some tips on how to succeed if I'm able to get a new job while working remotely during these COVID times? Thanks in advance. So a lot of us are doing interviews right now while we're remote. And so it's important to be able to show up well over your Zoom video and be able to build rapport in an otherwise situation where before we might shake somebody's hand or we might be able to see somebody's body language. Now you have to do it over Zoom. And so you're still looking for jobs the old fashioned way, whether it's through LinkedIn, emailing someone, calling a contact that you know, but the interview process now entirely online, unless you're in a specific situation or you have to go in person. And so it's still the same as it's always been. And you just need to be able to communicate who you are and mitigate your risk and sell yourself as the solution, just doing it online and digitally. Another attendee asks, I was a journalist, then a writer editor. I'm having trouble gaining experience in communications, which is the natural job transfer from reporter. I don't have many of the digital skills, but I have strong writing and editing skills. I don't know what my question is, but this is frustrating to me. I have been a finalist many times in the last 6 months, but can never make it happen. How does one counter age discrimination? Okay, so I think the question is how you counter possible age discrimination, and that's not necessarily for this particular webinar, but as far as being able to sell yourself as a communications person, I would say that comes up as your ability to mitigate your risk as somebody who is transferring from that communications angle to somebody who may be a content writer or a content marketing manager with an organization. And so what are the skills that you had as a reporter that apply in a content marketing framework? That would be your ability to write. It would be your ability to think strategically and position what you need to say in order to be effective in getting your message across. And then because a lot of content marketing jobs these days require that you have an understanding of digital marketing, I would say that taking some courses around digital marketing to make yourself look like you're in line with what companies want is also going to help really well. And so it's a combination, I believe, of you for skills and to be able to communicate effectively why you are that candidate of choice. And so you counter that possible age discrimination by getting up-to-date skills, by being able to speak the language of what the modern content marketing interviewer wants to hear, and then being able to take that forward. So I hope that helps. Often I find younger and less experienced people as the hiring manager. Yeah, so I would say that it's still the same thing, being able to communicate, that you're able to speak their language, that you're able to understand the technology in mind and be able to apply that within the industry and be effective as you get into your new role. So you're mitigating that risk. You are being able to speak their language, you're being able to reduce avenues of concern by having the skills that your hiring managers want. Another person asks, what are effective questions to find out a company's team culture? Sometimes what is the culture is too broad. Yeah, so that's a question for questions that you can ask them. And so that's for you to mitigate risk on their side. And so when it comes to questions, you can ask, how collaborative is everybody? What is the workday like? What is an average workday like? And how do people interact with each other? Since people have gone remote, you can say, how does the company get together to build rapport with one another and really get to know one another during times where we may not be in the same room together? And so those don't necessarily ask, that's the very, like, I think, deeper level into answering what culture might be. All right, so going back into being able to market yourself as the best solution. So if you answered no, right, you mentioned that companies want people to be able to hit the ground running. They hope that your past success translates to future accomplishments, and the less it costs to train you, the faster the ROI. And so, these things all sound very cutthroat. And, they are, because a lot of companies have numbers to make. They want to be able to not only take care of their employees, but make sure that the employees that they have are the best ones on staff so that they can get to the next level that they need to be at. And so as you navigate your interview process, how you communicate what it is that you're able to do is going to be a big part of you being able to show that you're the one that deserves to be extended the offer at the end of the day. And so that's the big question. How do you sell yourself as the hire for the job? And so I have a couple of considerations for this. Number one is about positioning yourself as the one. You've already made it into the interview process. You've submitted your resume, you've had your recruiter screen, and now you're talking to the hiring manager. And so now you're at the interview, and the company wants you to do well. I know that a company generally may think like, oh, we're going to pack this interview with tough questions, but in reality, it's the hope that, they want you to come in, perform well, and have a couple of really great candidates to choose from, as opposed to the other way around. The second piece is that companies all have problems. That's why they have these roles in the first place, because there's a problem that needs solving, whether it's writing something, whether it's counting money, whether it's developing technology, and they need people to go in and to be able to solve those problems so that they can go on and make more money. Number three, they want people to know what's at stake. What's at stake is not your ability to get a paycheck and pay your rent and pay your bills, as much as you understand how everyone has the challenges that they have and why you're the person to go and solve them and communicate across those different boundaries. So if you're a person who's a product manager and you need to be able to talk marketing, talk engineering, talk operations, and talk sales, you know what's at stake for everyone in the business, and your ability to communicate that is going to help you stand out because it doesn't make you a one-dimensional employee. Number three, it's going to be able to tell the stories that set you apart from others. A lot of us have been talking about those stories that we mentioned in the previous section, and the STAR method applies here as well. Tell me about a time where you were wildly successful with a particular project. And so that goes on for you to be able to talk about the situation, task, action, and result of when you did something really, really well. Number five, it's discover what they're asking for. So again, it's one of those questions where you have to go through and go underneath the message and be able to find out, okay, they're really saying that they want this, and being able to answer the question to that effect. And then, as opposed to the avenues of concern, I'm all about creating and increasing the avenues of excitement. If you're going into an interview and the person is talking with you about what your next step should be and dreaming about what it's like to have you on the job and what exciting projects you're going to work on and how those projects are going to look, you're in a really good place because you've just triggered the avenues of excitement, and that's where you want to be all the time. And so what kinds of questions sell you as the best candidate out there? Number one, tell me about a project that you're proudest of. So what it's really asking is they want you to tell a story about a project that made you really proud, but they really want to know is what your background is, what you're passionate about, where they can plug you in, and where have you made an impact that in the past can translate here into the present. Another question that I've had asked of me in interviews is, why would we regret not hiring you? And what they're really wanting to know is not necessarily like, okay, you're a great person and that, you're going to be a lot of fun to be around as we tackle this business challenge, but what do you find unique about yourself? What sets you apart from all the different candidates? So let's say you were a person and you were a software engineer at company ABC, and you and 15 other software engineers worked on the same technology, and somehow at the same time all of you decided to go and interview at another company, and you were all interviewing for the same job. What's going to set you apart from the other software engineers? What's going to make you different? And so that's what the company's going to be asking you, because they could be interviewing 15 other software engineers, 15 other marketers, 15 other accountants. But what makes you that unique candidate that brings that unique special sauce and insight that's going to set you apart as that candidate? How about tell us about yourself, right? This is a question that you'll often hear at the beginning of an interview. It's very operational of a question, but it's a question for you to sell yourself as the solution. You can say, what they want to know is, how do you see yourself? Who are you exactly? They're not going to tell you, they're not going to ask you to tell an whole entire story about your life, because that's not the situation here. But they want to know what your capabilities are. They want to know what you do, and they want to know how you fit within their puzzle piece. This is one of those promotional questions that's also a warm-up question before they get into the real tough questions. Another question is, what do you know about us? And so this is an avenue of excitement question, because it shows that you've really done the research. A lot of us, especially right now during the Great Resignation, get interview opportunities left and right. And maybe when maybe as you've been applying, you've applied to like 50 places in one day, and you get a phone call back and they're like, we'd love to talk to you. And you're like, which company are you again? That's never a good answer. You want to be able to say, hey, I researched your company the other day. This is what's going on with you. This is the products you have, and this is why you're exciting to work for. And you want to create that avenue of excitement because it builds that level of relatability and that level of rapport. And it shows that you've done your homework, because for every person who has done their homework, there's like 6 or 7 people who haven't done their homework, and they're not going to look as good as you. And so again, how do you navigate being able to sell yourself as the best candidate possible? Number one, when telling a story, use the STAR method. The STAR method, again, is situation, task, action, and result. So when you talk about a time where you completed a project successfully, you can say that, I was given a project where we were taking a product to market, and what I had to do was I had to create those same data sheets and those same webinars and sales sheets and sales enablement programs, and that's exactly what I did. And I collaborated with the marketing team. I collaborated with the digital marketing team, sales, and we had a fantastic campaign launch, because we ended up making X million number of dollars, and it ended up taking the company to the next level. And now we can all afford to move to a bigger office. And so that's using the STAR method in the reverse from where we were before. That shows that you're the best candidate possible. And so again, right, how do you navigate? You focus on value. So much like the part where you focus on value if you're mitigating risk, you can also heighten yourself as a person to be looked at as a hiring individual because of the projects that you've engaged in, the successes that you help attain, the places that you volunteered where positive things have happened. Somebody just asked, how long should a STAR story be? 2 to 3 minutes is about correct. I would say that if you can keep it to 4 or 5 sentences, then that would probably be enough as well, because you're able to keep the story to a condensed and succinct format. I've timed myself while answering this question before, and so 1.5 to about 2.5 minutes is roughly about the right juncture of it. And the more you know your story, the better it's going to end up coming out and flowing. So in addition to that, it's also about being humble. I know for a lot of us, when it comes to looking for your next job, you also am thinking, okay, so how do I balance between humble bragging and not losing myself during the whole entire story? And so companies want to get excited, but they don't want to be turned off. So you want to be able to measure your excitement and measure your humility in a sense where you're able to show them what exactly the business impact you bring is, but you don't want to sound like you're the person who is the only one who did it, since most of us work in teams. And so being humble is super important because it shows you as a down-to-earth candidate. So I want to do another practice session here. It's 8:15. I want to go to 8:20 here. And I want to have all of us work on two more questions. One is, what is a project you're proud of? And if we asked your boss about you, what would they say? Cheryl, do you want to come back on screen?
Okay, Albert. I'll do what is a project that I'm most proud of. Obviously,
Perfect.
it's opening Northside Branch Library, but I'm not going to talk about that one because you guys all hopefully know the story about Northside Branch Library. So I'm going to talk about our 80s prom. I had this wild idea that we were going to host an 80s prom at Northside Library. If you know the Rivermark neighborhood, you know that a lot of our community is first generation Americans. And so they have never been to high school here in America, and they've never experienced a prom. And what a great idea to experience a prom in the library. So I hired a DJ. I even had Mary Kay come in and do 80s makeup.
Wow.
I had a Chick-fil-A because of course the 80s is like chicken nugget central. So I had them do Chick-fil-A nuggets and free food. I had a meetup group that joined us, and the most important thing I got was an alcohol and beverage license. And if you've ever been through an alcohol beverage license, applying for that as a nonprofit is a nightmare. So going through that process, did all of that. I had 200 to 300 people at the library. And when I looked through the line of people who were there, these people, I can tell you, have never stepped foot in a library since they were in elementary school. And so also, this was also a fundraiser for our foundation and friends, which funds our programs at the library. And so I like to think of this program as a win-win-win. This was a win for the library because we got new customers that had never seen us before. It was a win for the community because they got to experience prom either again or maybe for the first time, American experience. And it also was a win for the foundation and friends who raised $2,000 plus in alcohol sales and ticket sales, and which went back to the library. So that is one project that I'm most proud of. I have pictures to prove that as well. And when I should say, Albert, usually when I do my thank you letters, I usually include, if I use that example, I use a picture of that example and, hey, hopefully, maybe if I host this again, I'll give you a free ticket.
Wow. Yeah. See, so that's pretty cool. And if I'm another library, or if you're interviewing for an event job, that's an avenue of excitement because it showcases how creative you are. It showcases how you were able to serve a community or serve a potential customer. And you mentioned that you raised over $2,000. And so that's a really great use of the R part of the STAR result. And so for all of those of you who are practicing with this question right now, whether it's a project you're proud of, or if we asked your boss about you, it's an opportunity to really showcase what you're really great at, whether it's marketing something, counting somebody else's money, being able to make a leader happy because of what they've done, etc. And so feel free to place your practice answer either in the Q&A or in the chat. I'd love to see all the wonderful things all of you have done at work. Yeah, Miriam says, a project I'm proud of is helping a startup breastfeeding retail company optimize their process and logistics so that they're able to reach customers like Amazon and HEB, and now they move into a bigger warehouse and are becoming a small medium enterprise. Yeah, see, that's really amazing because the avenue of excitement there is you were able to take a retail product and you were able to take them into a large supermarket. And so if I'm a product, if I have a product and I'd like to do the same, those are the skills that I want. Who do you know? How do you do it? What do you do? And so that's really important to be able to mention. Another question is, how do you deal with a big pause? Usually what I face is after answering a question, the panel looked at me as they wanted me to add more, but I'm already done with the answer. So how exactly to deal with this situation? Yeah, so this goes back to talking about the STAR method. Being able to tell a story is important because obviously in every story there's a beginning, middle, and end. And so you want to be able to signpost them and tell them that you're at the beginning or the end of a story. And they'll know this because you're going to tell them what happened, what you did, what you acted upon to get there, and then what happened as a result. And once they get that result, they're going to know, okay, this is what this person did, and this is how it ended up being. And so there should be a natural progression based on how you answer those questions and based on using the models that I've shared today. And so as we've done this practice, now that it's 8:20, I hope many of you have put something down on paper or put something down in your word processor. What did you notice about your answer? What is it that you did to sell yourself as the best candidate possible and put yourself as that person who knew the solution? And did you open up avenues of excitement? In the way that you tell your story, or is the interviewer going to say, hey, I really love what this person has to offer, and I can't wait for them to sign the offer letter and get them to start? Avenues of excitement is everything of what you want, right? Whether it's a job interview or even like, on a date, like let's just go into dating and love here for a moment. That when you meet that person and they have every single check mark that you possibly have when it comes to what you look for in a mate, that's an avenue of excitement because you just can't wait to move forward. All right, so finally, how to sell yourself as the best candidate. So again, practice makes perfect. You must know your answers and write them down. Anticipate what employers are going to ask in your industry, just like when it comes to mitigating risk. You want to know how they'll help them solve what's at stake. Understand what's really being asked, and then engage in those avenues of excitement so that people can't wait to hire you and have you sign that offer letter. So the final thing I want to talk about is a tip for entry-level employees. And so I don't know, we have a few entry-level employees in the crowd tonight. And one of the things that I want to talk about is the entry-level conundrum, which is the final piece of this presentation. And what's notable about the entry-level conundrum is that it's one of those situations where in order to get a job, you need experience, but to have experience, you need a job. But if you don't have experience, how do you get in there? And this is often played out in the interview process with companies wanting to hire new and fresh talent, but they're unsure of how to go about it because they know that the person who comes in may end up burning the house down, but they want to be able to know that whoever does come in and burn that house down burns maybe a part of that house down. And so the reason why, entry-level employees, they carry both risk and they also lack a body of work. And so the risk already exists there, and the ability to market themselves as a solution is not quite there yet because they never actually implemented a solution in the first place. Avenues of concern are unfortunately heightened given the stakes of business, and avenues of excitement might be there depending on which school you went to, right? If you went to an Ivy League or Stanford or Berkeley, it probably looks really great because you not only have the educational attainment, but it's also likely you understand the theoretical, and maybe even your professor wrote the textbook on what to do. But for a lot of other places, the avenues of concern are much, much larger because they're not sure what they're going to get out of you. And so as somebody who is going for that entry-level job, employers know that you're going to be a risk, so you need to find a way to reduce it. And so how do you do that? You do that by focusing on the value, again, of the projects that you bring, whether it's projects or volunteering. You come to the table with a strategic beginner's mindset. The beginner's mindset is knowing that, while you may not know exactly what to do, you're going to go and find out what it is that you're going to do. And you're going to be a person who is very solution oriented. Remember, no matter where you are in your career, whether you're somebody who's about to sunset into retirement, or whether you're somebody who is about to start your career or in the middle of it, you're going to be a person who's going to be looked upon to solve problems. Companies have problems, and you're the person who's there to solve it. You want to know how transferable skills or ideas can contribute. If you're somebody who's entry level, maybe you were in college or high school and you're trying to figure out what to do, Maybe you put on an event. Maybe you bring your friends together for social events and you use things like Eventbrite, or you use things like Evite to do it. How do you use technologies, and how can you apply your usage of those technologies into the real world? And then you build rapport to create avenues of excitement. One of the things that you can do in the avenues of excitement is you can bring in your new and fresh ideas. As somebody with those new and fresh ideas, you have the opportunity to really show them that, you know what, you might have been doing things here for a really long time in the way that you've been doing them, but I've read some certain things, I've done some certain things. And because of things done that way, I'm able to bring these new ideas and align with what the company wants. And so that's building rapport and creating those avenues of excitement where you may drop a new idea into a person's mind and say, hey, maybe this person does have a good thing that they can bring. And so that's their opportunity to be able to look at you as a serious candidate. And so I want to offer some final thoughts, right? The interview at the end of the day starts with you. Number one, it's about creating that document of questions and stories that you can prepare so people know you can exactly know what's going to be coming at you. You can brainstorm where you've been and where you're going. So that'll help you create that story, create those avenues of excitement while reducing those avenues of concern. And number three, understanding what's at stake. Why does this job exist in the first place? And how does it impact everyone around you? Number four, it's being aware of creating those avenues of excitement and reducing those avenues of concern. How do you practice those questions so that you don't talk yourself out of the interview while you're able to create those levels of excitement where people look at you and say, hey, you're the person I want to have that sign that offer letter because you have some great ideas. You can bring an 80s prom and bring so many new people who haven't been to the library in years and years and years and do a dang good job at it. And then number five, practice your answers with a friend. And so when it comes down to the end of it, if you're not an entry level person, an interview is two things. Number one, it's all about mitigating your risk. And number two, it's about selling yourself as the best solution. And it's very much in parallel with what we do already in our lives, whether it's dating, buying a house, looking at food, traveling, and so much more. And so with that, I want to invite you to join Albert's List. I know Cheryl shared a link in the chat earlier. It's at the link that I have here on the screen. And you'll be able to meet 46,000 recruiters, job seekers, hiring managers, and coaches. And you'll be able to get and give advice, discover jobs, get referred, network with others, and join us for so many other events that we have, whether it's our Monday night mock interviews, which you can sign up for if you'd like to reach out to me, or our job report readouts that we do with a professor every single first Friday, or any of our premium workshops that we do with career coaches across the country. And so with that, that's an invitation for you to connect with me or send me an email so we can talk more about your interview challenges or your desire to be on an interview. And with that, I want to thank you for the pleasure of your time. And I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much, Albert. Hey, can you put up the last slide so I can copy and paste it in the chat?
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. Appreciate
it. Yep. And so Miriam says, which would be the best great platforms for reaching volunteers as a graduate that want to earn experience in several fields for the tech industry? That's a great question. I think you would want to probably reach out to the career fairs in colleges and universities. That definitely, there's a lot of students who'd be willing to do some work over there, and so that's an opportunity for them to get in. And so I would reach out actually to the heads of those departments for computer science or web design or what have you, so that they have so that they can meet those so that they can offer those opportunities to their students. And so I'll go ahead and mark your second question. Aiko, this will be on YouTube. I will send out something upon completion. Which second to last slide? We'll take this slide here. Yeah.
Yeah, I copied the links in the chat. So if you go to the chat box, you should see it all in there.
Yep. And then Poonam asks, can you share some tips on how to impress your new boss and coworkers, and what types of actions to engage in during the first 3 to 6 months. Yeah, so this is also another different presentation, and so this is a presentation on what to do during the first 90 days, and so I'll give you the answer quickly. Even though Cheryl, maybe this could actually be another presentation I can come back for.
Okay, you're always welcome to come back, Albert. Always.
Yeah, so to impress your managers in the first 3 to 6 months, number one, be open to feedback and be open to learning. Number two, grab the opportunity by the horns and look for opportunities to contribute. Number three, take on the be first in, be the last person out mentality. Number four, I would say network and collaborate with as many people as you possibly can in a relevant manner so that they know what it is that you bring to the company and that you can increase your influence. So hopefully that helps. All right, any other questions?
I think there might not be any questions, but I should show you. This is all
Okay.
my flashcards with all my questions and answers that I've been working on.
Oh my gosh.
And then, here's my booklet of all the questions I've been asked. So every time I interview, I immediately write down the questions that were asked of me because they're the same questions that come up every single time, just maybe regurgitated differently. And so that's how I end up practicing, is just drilling it in. I'm not the best interviewer, but I give it the college try every single time by doing the
Cheryl does her homework though. So, I mean, that counts. So be like Cheryl, do your homework.
Flashcards.
The best interview you can give is the interview you do before you go and give the actual interview. So yeah, cool. Well, I look forward to all of you joining Albert's list and engaging further, and I hope to see you all again soon. Maybe we'll do one on the first 90 days.
Thank you so much, Albert. And if you guys can do me a huge favor, when you're ready to leave, you can click the end button and then up will pop a survey. It has only 2 questions on there. One question is multiple choice. The other one is long answer, but don't worry, you can give a short answer. But that helps us determine what programs you would like to see in the future, and also helps us with funding for our library program. So if you like this program along with others, please do me a favor and fill out that survey. That really helps us out. We really do appreciate it. And thank you so much, Albert, for doing
Thank
this.
you.
All of Albert's Jobless and Referrals and everybody else get to their next job opportunity. You don't know how many people that you have helped in before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and potentially after the pandemic. So
yeah, there's definitely going to be a lot of stuff coming up after the pandemic too.
yes.
So yeah.
And Ridhan says, could you please provide your YouTube channel, Albert?
Yep. I'll just go ahead and link it here. So
just in case you couldn't get any more of Albert, he is on YouTube. He is active on Facebook. I have to say, I always refer people to Albert and he answers people like that pretty quickly, unless he's on vacation, which,
unless I'm on vacation.
But even when he's on vacation, he's not really on vacation. He's like working.
Yep. All righty, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and hand it right over back to you.
Thank you so much, Albert. Thank you. Have a great evening. And I will stick around for any library related questions, and I will post our upcoming programs coming up. I'm really excited about our upcoming programs. October 6th, if you want to join us, is how to sum up Common Core for those of you parents who are so confused with Common Core. I am thoroughly confused with it. So hopefully we can demystify that together. October 12th, I'm really excited about this one because if you guys don't know, I am really passionate about stock investing. And so maximizing dividends and mutual fund investing for growing returns. As we all know, that during this month, it's been a very rocky month for stocks this month. So for those of you guys who are looking for a little bit of stable income, I wouldn't say that stock investing is totally stable, but dividend and mutual fund investing might give you that stability that you might need to have residual income every quarter or every month, depending on how your stock pays dividends. So that is October 12th. And by the way, I should tell you, one of my attendees from the last stock seminar made at least $5,000 based on the recommendations of my panelists. And so, of course, again, you take your own investment risks, but I did want to share that story. And then for those of you guys who have teenagers or tweens, we have October 21st at 7 o'clock. We have answering questions, all the questions relating to advanced placement and honors classes. We've been getting a lot of questions at our college prep seminars about AP and honors classes. So we're just going to answer all of them on October 21st. So hopefully you can join us then. But I am ready for any library related questions. If you're, thanks, Aiko, thank you so much. If you have any, you can put them in the chat. I think I still have the chat open. Yeah. I have the chat open. Yeah, I have the chat open, or you can put them in Q&A. And again, how to find these programs, you're going to go to Eventbrite, and then you'll search for Northside Branch Library or Santa Clara City Library, and you should come up with these programs, or you can type in the title and it should be there. Take a picture on your smartphone. Type it in later, or you can email me as well, and I'll be happy to register you for any and all of our programs. So there's still 39 of you left. Oh, thanks, so you guys. Thank you so much. I have 38 burning library related questions or maybe interview questions. I'm not the best interviewer, but the questions, you keep doing it and the questions are all the same. They're just different packages of the same thing reiterated over and over again. So hopefully through practice, you'll be able to get that job offer that you want and deserve. Thanks, Aiko. Thank you so much. You too. Have a great evening. Yeah, so it's just about practice. That's all it is. And maybe a little bit of acting, so that you can sound not rehearsed, but you are kind of rehearsed. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And don't forget to click out and fill out that survey. Again, it'll take like 2 seconds. I promise. It's not that hard. Still have 24 of you on here, 23. Maybe you want to hear more about 80s prom or maybe my Brew University program where I hosted with Gordon Biersch Brewery when they were still open. We had a 3-part brewery program on hops and different in how you make beer and how you food and beer tastings. I've done that as well. And funny enough, it's funny because for a librarian who does a lot of alcohol-based programs, I unfortunately am allergic to alcohol, but I know what gets people in the library, which is alcohol. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I wish you were there too for 80s prom. It was epic. I still have people to this day asking me when I'm going to have the next 80s prom. And I'm like, oh man, to pull off that program, I think it's like once in a lifetime, but I had the most hideous dress on. It was awesome. I felt like I was like plucked out and put into the movie Pretty in Pink. It was epic. And I had legendary sportscaster Rick Kwan, who actually attended. I didn't mention that, but I do have pictures of it too. I still have 20 of you left. Burning library related questions. Oh, one of the questions that I can tell you, one of the questions that my former director always used to ask that I thought was pretty cool was you got home from a great day at work and you're driving home, you turn on the radio and you had a great day at work. What happened at work? That was like usually her signature question. Mine is always about, tell me about your biggest failure. Um, those are like the two like signature questions that I always like remember in my life is like, you're driving home from work and you had the best day ever. What happened? Um, I thought that was a pretty great question. And it's funny, you hear a variety of different answers for that as well. So it's pretty cool. Anyways, I think you guys are all logging off. I have a Real Housewives show to watch, I'm sure. So anyways, take care, everyone. Have a great evening. Good luck on those interviews. Practice, practice, practice. And hopefully we can see you with that job offer and getting that next job opportunity. Okay. And please share that opportunity with me and let me know if you did get the job, because I will be your biggest cheerleader for that. Okay. Take care, everyone. Have a great evening. Bye.